The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening. Case 14. Nanquan kills the cat. The priest Nanquan found monks of the eastern and western halls arguing about a cat. He held up the cat and said, "Everyone, if you can say something, I will spare this cat. If you can't say anything, I will cut off its head." No one could say a word, so Nanquan cut the cat in two. That evening, Zhaozu returned from outside, and Nanquan told him what happened. Zhaozu removed a sandal from his foot, put it on his head, and walked out. Nanquan said, "If you had been there, the cat would have been spared." Wumen says, "Tell me, what is the meaning of Zhaozu putting his straw sandal on his head? If you can give a turning word here, you will see that Nanquan's challenge was not irresponsible. But if you cannot yet do this, danger." Wumen's verse says, "If Zhaozu had been there, he would have taken charge. He would have snatched away the sword, and Nanquan would have begged for his life." Yes, everyone has a copy of this underneath their right side if you want to take it out. This is a tremendously fun koan. Although I'm sure there's animal rights would have something to say about that. I'm thinking this may take 2 Sundays to address because I talked a little bit beforehand, and I want to be able to have the time to meet everyone and interview. Which is funny because that all ties into this case. One of the things that I notice, you can buy all kinds of commentaries and versions of the Mumonkan, and I haven't seen one that actually addresses some of the stuff that's in this case, because I just think that so few people actually find it interesting. So I'm just going to start at the very beginning. The first thing is Nanquan. Nanquan was a Dharma heir of a teacher named Matsu, and his brother, his Dharma brother, Nanquan's Dharma brother, was a monk named, one of his Dharma brothers, I suppose, was a monk named Baizhang Huaihai, and he's in our lineage. In fact, he's so significant in our lineage that when we chant the short form, he still shows up. He's Master Linji's grandfather, and his Dharma heir is Huangbo. So it's Baizhang, Huangbo, Linji. And the brother of Baizhang is priest Nanquan. Nanquan's most significant descendant disciple is Zhaozu, Chaochu, Joshu in Japanese. We've seen him already a bunch of times in the Mumonkan. Significant dude in Zen. So we have here this situation where there's the monastery. The priest Nanquan found monks of the eastern and western halls arguing about a cat. This is the single line that I think is most neglected or most misunderstood or most ununderstood in the case. So we have to talk about the monastic environment at the time. Nanquan is the Dharma brother of Baizhang, and one of the biggest contributions that Baizhang made to the Zen world was the Baizhang Code for Monastic Conduct in Zen Monasteries. This guy was the big dude that sat down and said, how are we going to run these places? And he wrote this big codex, apparently, which has come down through generations and generations and generations. And although there is no existing physical copy of what Baizhang produced, everything that's come out since even those that are in existence that came out near or shortly after the time of Baizhang, all admit or give credit to Baizhang's code. So we have an existent rules of order in a monastery. At this time, the monasteries aren't small little Zen centers like they are in North America with 14, 15 people. There are hundreds of people who are in residence at monasteries. 200, 400, up to 1,000 sometimes. Massive halls. And these are all organized, structured in various ways. There's various different officers, of which we have just a basic sampling here at the Victoria Zen Centre. But that even the sampling that we use here is fundamentally based on Baizhang's code. We have here Eastern and Western halls mentioned. And every time I've ever heard a Zen teacher talk about this, they just talk about the sheer quantity of monks in a monastery. And what I've come to learn, or what I've come to see, is that this isn't exactly accurate. And there's a lot actually being said in this first line, where if you just diminish it to that, you miss entirely. And I think the only way that you would ever learn it is if you're a nerd like me, who's interested in ancient Buddhist monastic code. So the Eastern and the Western halls are not just two different groups of monks that practice in two different areas because the monastery is so big. The Eastern and Western halls actually represent two separate functions in the monastery. Technically speaking, traditionally, they're in the same hall, but in two different ends of it, which is also partially to do with their function within the monastery. To sort of bring it into perspective of what we do here, we could say that the sort of practice side, the formal immersion side, which maybe is represented in our center by the Zendo team or maybe even the practice council, is one hall. And the other side is the administrative side. This is the treasurers and the scribes and the administrators of the monastery. This is what constitutes the two halls in the Zen training monastery. We have those that represent, to put it in terms that I use frequently, the practice of minus, of dissolution. These people who are constantly focused on true nature and zero. And then we have on the other side the manifestation side, the plus side. Those who say, well, this is great minus activity, and now where do we go from here? How do we manifest from here? As a community, as a teaching, as a practice, how do we manifest? This is the board of directors of the Victoria Zen Centre. This is a great... So you can see already we've got this great setup for a bit of a fight. And there's all kinds of commentaries that you'll see where they talk about the dispute over the cat. They say, well, it could be that they were arguing over the Buddha nature of a cat. You know, like this goes back to old Chao Chu, right? I guess he's not so old in this case. This goes back to, maybe Chao Chu started it, huh? Who knows? But I don't think so. I don't think it would be that big a deal personally. I suspect that it's, and having spent some times in a monastery, it was more likely a very practical dispute. What is the place of the cat in the monastery? Maybe one group of monks are saying, well, it's an animal and there's Buddhist rules against keeping animals, and maybe we shouldn't allow it to walk freely through the Zen meditation hall. And then there's another group of people saying, what does it matter? Your meditation is no good if you're being distracted by a cat anyway. Who knows? It's really impossible to say. Or maybe, who's responsible for cleaning up this cat's mess? Who's responsible for feeding it? There's a lot of translations that say, Nanquan seeing his opportunity. And this is another thing that's really important to grasp about how Zen was practiced in these days, in these massive monasteries with hundreds of people. Today there's 15 of us. There's 14 people that I need to have interview with. And every week people sit up here stressed about, oh God, what time are we ever going to get out of here at? Is it going to be 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock? How is it possible? Realistically, even today, having a 2-minute interview with each of you, that's more than 5 minutes apiece with all the bowing and ringing and running up and down and all that kind of stuff. It's very difficult. But certainly when there's a monastery with 200, 300, 500, 1,000 people, seeing each person every day is just not possible. So how does the teaching take place in this kind of environment? When I was young, maybe 1996, it must have been 95 or 96, I was walking downtown and I think I've said this before, but I ran into this Chan nun. Her name was Kunli Shi, and not wanting to miss the opportunity to take advantage of such a rare situation, I kind of introduced myself and we ended up spending a good part of the day together. And so I asked her about this kind of thing, because being trained in a Japanese tradition, I was kind of like, so this is how it happens. We go in and have an interview and stuff. And she kind of laughed and she said, oh, there's too many people in my tradition. So I said, well, how does the teacher go about teaching in that environment? And the term that she used was teaching by ambush. And so I sort of got the clarification on that, and that's what we're seeing here. And in fact, it's what we see in a lot of the cases in the Mumonkan is this practice of masters teaching by ambush. Different methods or different techniques have been sort of utilized in form in order to address this issue of how to meet or how to teach or how to greet students when there are more students than there is time for. In this kind of a monastery, people often stayed for longer. It's said that Zhaozu stayed with Nanquan for 20 years. So it's not just Nanquan who's walking around and ambushing people. Also in the mix, you've got Zhaozu, who is, while only at the half point of his life, maybe at this time, he's 60 years old. He's no slouch, and he's also walking around. There are probably several other characters walking around the monastery. So generally speaking, when you look at these cases and it seems like these monks are always walking around and like saying these weird things to each other and testing each other out and chucking stuff at each other and setting each other up, that's probably accurate. It was probably a really kind of a scary place to live because you're surrounded by these people who are all looking to demonstrate the Dharma by ambush. Wonderful. Wonderful environment. Scary. I don't know if I'd want to be there, but yeah. So what you have is this situation where Zhaozu is out of the monastery. Maybe he's gone out on business. This would indicate that at this point, Zhaozu's a fairly senior monk. If he's allowed to sort of come and go out of the monastery, he's a fairly senior monk. You have this situation where you've got this conflict between the Eastern and Western halls, which, although not many people talk about it, I think is significant. I think it's significant because it represents a conflict of opinion or a conflict in balance between the representatives of minus and the representatives of plus. Which is right? Which is more important? Which is the dominant or more significant or more valuable aspect of practice? Is it this activity of dissolution of self, of melting, of dropping away, the manifestation of zero? Or is it the manifestation of plus, arising from zero and walking into the world? This cat is the poor monkey in the middle. He's the poor sort of place, ground zero, so to speak. So you can just imagine Nanquan, and I imagine that this is probably a debate that isn't just sort of cropped up one day. This is something that's probably been festering around the monastery for a few days, maybe even weeks. This difference, people, picking sides and picking teams, and which it's like politics in the monastery over a cat. So finally, Nanquan, seeing his opportunity, grabs the cat. Uh-oh. All of a sudden everybody goes, busted. Here's Nanquan, who's ambushed the whole place, and he's holding up this cat, and he pulls out a big knife or a sword, and he says, "Everyone, if you can say anything, something, I'll spare the cat. If you can't say anything, I'm going to cut off its head." So, I want everybody to just sort of stop for a second, because I think that probably everybody, when you hear about this, it's easy to sort of get all whipped up. And I want you to sort of just, as I always say with these cases, is to take away the two-dimensional, the spherical component, or the two-dimensional aspect of this case, of us looking back in time at these old Chinese dudes, and put ourselves into it. Put ourselves into the position of the plus side. The significance of manifestation. The significance of letting the rubber hit the road. Letting our practice have effect in our lives. Let us also then take up the position of minus. The dissolution of self, the realization of our true nature. Let's take up this debate about which is more significant. Let's take up this situation where, like out from behind a pillar or something, this old Zen master jumps with a knife and grabs this ratty, tortoise shell is kind of what the cat appears to me. Ah! Got this cat. Okay, enough! If anybody can settle this, if anybody can say something, if anybody can step up and do something, then I won't kill this cat. And I think everybody is astonished on many levels. Here we have a Buddhist monastery. Here we have this teaching of compassion and non-harming and all this stuff. And suddenly we have cat on the menu, I think, maybe. Or a real problem with this cat. Moral problem. And I think just as we sit here thinking about it, everybody is flabbergasted. Everything also, I think, this matter of life and death, this great significance, everybody is immediately drawn in to the moment, to this very activity that's unfolding in front of them. The separate position of plus, the separate position of minus is dropped, and we find ourselves manifesting fully in the activity that's unfolding in this very moment. But nobody can speak up. Nobody seems able to drop their fixated position and manifest clearly in the moment. So the story says that Nanquan cut the cat in two. And I'm not laughing because I think that's particularly funny. A huge amount of debate in Zen, or all kinds of suggestions come up about whether Nanquan just did it as a show and then kind of goes and kind of throws the cat off and off it runs. Some people, maybe bloodthirsty, say, oh yes, absolutely. In order to demonstrate the point, it's necessary that Nanquan actually lops off the cat's head. I kind of have a suspicion myself about what actually went on here. Because we've seen that it is certainly not beyond a Zen master to fabricate an amazing tale, to create a story for the sole purposes of demonstrating a point or making a teaching, particularly when it involves an exceptional student. And the story that I'm talking about is case number 2, which we've already covered, which is called The Wild Fox, but it's called Baizhang's Wild Fox. Funny, we were talking about him earlier. Funny that should be Nanquan's brother that comes up with that great story. So what I suspect, or my suspicion, which is not verifiable, and certainly I've never seen anyone else proposing this, is that this whole interaction between the two halls with the cat and the knife and Nanquan is the story that is told to Zhaozu. The person being ambushed in this story is not the head of the West Hall or the head of the East Hall, but it's Zhaozu when he returns to the monastery from outside. Coming back in, this senior student comes in to see Nanquan, and all the case says is that evening Zhaozu returned from outside and Nanquan told him what happened. So, this is what happened today, Zhaozu. What do you think of that? He's, I think, in my opinion, asking Zhaozu, which is better? Which way do you go, Zhaozu? Is it better to manifest emptiness, or is it better to arise out of emptiness and manifest clearly in this world? Are you a monk of the East Hall, or are you a monk of the West Hall? Where do you stand? Zhaozu removes his sandal from his foot, puts it on his head, and walks out. Nanquan said, if you had been there, the cat would have been spared. So, this case, I think, is an offering to us, because I think, at least in my own life, I have certainly manifested on both sides of this argument. I've certainly felt like, oh, now it's necessary practice. Just this meditation is the key to all things. This is the real Zen practice. And then there's been times where going out into the world and being Zen, has also felt like the ultimate practice, true Zen practice. So, facing this situation, monk of the East Hall, monk of the West Hall, facing this situation of the teacher saying, what do you say? If you can say anything, this cat will be spared. This life will be spared. If you can bring this debate to resolution in this very moment, this life has already been spared. I'm going to just cut it off there, and we'll do interview, and I'll pick this up next week for the comments and verse. The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the Victoria Zen Centre. If you enjoy it, please forget about making a donation. Instead, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend that you think will enjoy it as much as you did. You may also consider purchasing the Living Zen-podcast app, which is now available on the iTunes App Store. Thank you for listening.